Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast.
What is good? Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Podcast. My name is Nick Engvall. I am with my guys Todd and Rohit to talk about the Spanish Grand Prix and a lot of suffering for some of us in the sneaker history / Exhaust Notes fantasy Formula One league, because we had some heavy commitments to Charles Leclerc for this race. But how you guys doing?
Brokenhearted, because I think, to your point, Nick, Charles Leclerc messed us up, all of us, and I'm really, if now is the time to do it, I'm gonna do it. Young Julie, I know you're hopefully done with the move. You've got a new job in your life. The cat's adorable. We need you to put that juju back on Max. So if it's printing out like a couple of 8x10s, putting them in the freezer, because I believe that's like an Italian custom to put somebody on ice, I'm gonna go ahead and need you to do that, because it's looking like Red Bull's about to run away with this.
It sure does. Maybe Julie was just teasing Max and was like, you know what? I'm going to put a hex on his DRS for about, I don't know, a third of the race. Whatever it is, we need a battle at the front, because it looks like Red Bull's, even with the technical difficulties, they really are the powerhouse now. They have taken the leap.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let's run through the final
Placement?
results. We got Max Verstappen, Red Bull; Sergio Perez, Red Bull; George Russell, Mercedes, third; Carlos Sainz, Ferrari, in fourth; Lewis Hamilton in fifth; Valtteri Bottas in sixth; Esteban Ocon in seventh; Lando Norris in eighth; Fernando Alonso in ninth; Yuki Tsunoda in 10th, the last in the points; Sebastian Vettel of Aston Martin in 11th; Danny Rick in McLaren at 12th; Pierre Gasly at AlphaTauri in 13th; Mick Schumacher looked like he was going to get points this week early on, but the Haas just didn't hold up, 14th; Lance Stroll in 15th; Nicholas Latifi in 16th; Kevin Magnussen in 17th; Alex Albon in 18th; and Zhou Guanyu and Charles Leclerc both did not finish the race. So I think, one, I was really, really close, and for a few moments at the end of the race, I thought Lewis might end up hitting that third place podium finish that I predicted last week. It was way closer than I think you expected, Todd.
Yeah, I really was, man. That car, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but holy hell, was that a drive. But, like, overall, are Mercedes back? Can we say they're back? Because I think we're back. I think they're
Feels
back.
like it, right?
That car was a rocket ship.
Yeah.
Today.
I mean, so at the beginning of the race, if you didn't watch the whole thing, Lewis excuse me. Lewis and who do
He hit Kevin Magnussen right off the bat.
yeah. K-Mag, yeah. So
I mean,
they a little mix up, right? Lewis is on the radio. I think we should just retire the car. He had a flat. He had to go in like second lap, basically replace the tires, and literally on the radio saying that he's thinking they should retire the car. The team responds and says, "Well, we from what we're looking at on the data side, we think we can get an 8th place finish out of this." Granted, this is 1 or 2 laps into the race, 1 or 2 laps completed, so it was it was the Lewis I love that is absolutely completely playing with people's emotions through the radio communications. But to Todd's point, that car was, I think he did get fastest lap, right?
He did.
He had it for a long time. I don't know if he actually ended up with it.
So I'm
But he
looking
got
at it right now. Sergio Perez actually got it.
Oh, because he pitted super late for the softs. That's right.
Yep.
No, I mean, I was going to ask you both, in the moments of Lewis Hamilton sandbaggery, is this like a top 5 sandbag? Is this a top 10? Like, how are we feeling about this? Because lo and behold, he just continues to be a professional race car driver, and that gets him in the top 5 almost every week. And I think it was Travis in the Discord who was like, hey guys, he's doing it again. He's like doing the silent assassin Lewis Hamilton thing again, which is crazy. That man has won 8 championships. There's nothing he can do on a track that is considered silent unless his car stalls. And even then, I think I got the technical jargon wrong. So please, car professors, walk me through this.
Now, for me, when I heard that, it didn't come across as like typical whiny Lewis, like, woe is me. I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like he's already on his 3rd power unit. He was 50 seconds behind 19th place. 50.
Yep.
At that point. So that's like 2 minutes behind the lead. And I know that it appears that, they fixed their porpoising issue and they finally got like a baseline set up for the car. But I was like, come on, guys. Like, you're not going to make up 2 minutes, even if it is lap 2. Like, they're not going to just slow down for you. Like, it came across as like, oh, that actually kind of makes sense. And then when Bono came over the radio and was like, actually, like, with our pace, we could probably hit 8th place. I was like, okay, well.
So do you think that initial hesitancy by Lewis is him thinking they're probably worse off than what they actually are? Because for all intents and purposes, say what you will, they've struggled, but they're still, I think, top 3 or top 4, right? And is that just his cloudy disposition because of the fact that he's not living up to the gold standard that he so consistently set? Because, yeah, P8, there are drivers on the grid right now that would kill for a P8. Hi, Mick Schumacher. How are you doing today?
Yeah, exactly. Especially after the last couple races.
Poor Mick. Damn it,
so
Mick.
Close. It's coming, Mick. Keep it up. It's coming. I have faith.
I mean,
go ahead.
No, Russell went, 2 years before he got a podium? And the first podium he got was just because of that farce in Spa last year?
I think to your question, Rohit, I felt like it felt like genuine disappointment from Lewis. And, I would say over the radio, take anything any of these guys say with a grain of salt. I mean, Max was basically, without saying it, threatening to kill half of the team when he got back to the pits when things went awry with his DRS. So, like these guys need to have anything you hear on the radio, just know that there is like a flip of a coin of how much truth there is to it, in my opinion. But with Lewis, it felt like he was pretty disappointed. And I think this is interesting because I think I brought this up in last episode or maybe a couple episodes back. The thought process for these drivers now, when there's budgets involved and when there's all these other things that layer on and to me, that has to be a part of the way they think, right? They can't just think about the drive, right? They have to think about everything that surrounds the championship, right? So having this, this budget limit and whatever that's going to look like as the season plays out, the smartest drivers, Lewis probably being, I would say Lewis is probably the smartest driver on the grid. Maybe I would put Vettel up there, but they have to have a lot of championship years. They have to have a lot of experience, a lot of losing and a lot of winning in order to kind of, for me to say that they would be at the top of that list. And all these guys are crazy intelligent, but they have to be, you know what I mean? You have to have that, it's like sports intelligence, right? Yeah. And I think with Lewis, he's always thinking about this. He's a driver, but he's probably thinking just as much as an engineer, as a team principal, as it's a part of what makes him great. And to have him thinking about that kind of, I think, makes me think all these guys have to be thinking about this as they go, because eventually they might run into issues or limits or whatever that looks like where, I don't know, are they penalized? How are they penalized for going over budget? All those things. And whether or not that's really ever going to happen, I don't think if, unless a team goes wildly crazy, I don't think there's going to be any there'll be a bunch of bickering amongst the teams, but I don't think the FIA would be oh, shut them down. They've used too many cars, right? It's just give us some more money and you can keep racing. But that said, I think that weighs heavily on the best drivers because they think about all these things. And I think that's what it sounded like with Lewis, which also I would say, and I'll get into this later in the episode. I think this race, the fact that Lewis felt so down at the beginning and came back so hard to, a fifth place finish, which could have easily been a fourth, could have easily been a third. Like, he was really close to having all of that. Obviously the Red Bulls are way out front, but I think that's probably like enough fire for Lewis to be like very competitive moving forward.
Yeah, I think you really summed it up perfectly there, Nick. And what you said, Rohit, was perfect. It was the past history of the 5 races really like fed into that dejection that he was feeling. Like, oh, we've been kind of dog shit. We might be on the fringe of like being on the pace again, but like I'm now 2 minutes behind the leader. Let's just throw in the towel, save the engine, and we'll live to fight another day, essentially. And everything else Nick just said way better than I could.
No, but I mean, the other thing I will say this is we compare and contrast that to the last couple of years, because it almost felt like an annual tradition where Lewis Hamilton would have one race a year where he's at like 20th and then he would win all the way from the back. So that's the biggest jarring thing to me is like we're so used and we're so conditioned to see this guy pull the miraculous and make it look normal that when he has these moments of doubt, and I think it's fair to call it a moment of doubt, we're all kind of perplexed by it because, buddy, you are fantastic. You do what we all aspire to do if we were ever in that position. So, interesting case. Kudos to them for continuing to be probably the most professional and underrated car that is on the grid this year. But, yeah, I think between that and the other thing I kind of wanted to touch base with you guys on was, did Max get a glimpse of his future because of the way George Russell kind of held him at bay for a couple of laps? Because I thought that was probably the most interesting subplot coming out of this race.
One more thing I wanted to mention on Lewis's dejection. The one thing I didn't think about earlier or when it happened, like one safety car, which is decently common in Spain, and he's like right back on the pack and can fight through the field. Like an early safety car probably would have given him a chance to fight for the win with the pace that he had today. So like, even though he doesn't have all the information at the time, and it's just like, oh fuck, like let's just wrap it up for today. Like, he needs to rely on his team in that moment to like, we still have the pace, we can still make things happen, and one safety car, which could happen at any moment, and I'm really surprised it didn't with the 2 spins I'm sure we'll talk about. It could have been anybody's race.
And I think too, like the other thing to consider about that's a great point. The other thing to consider about that, and this we could kind of get into like the Max and Red Bull conversation. These guys motivate their engineers and their team through those communications, right? Like that is a part of it. The psychological, I mean, the cussing and yelling and name calling aside, there is some level of like the genuineness of that frustration is going to make the team say, fuck, we got to do better. Right. And every driver has a different approach to the way they say that, to the way they do that. You heard, with Checo, the disappointment at the end, right? With having to make the switch, for Max, which, we'll get into, but Max takes the exact opposite of this, right? And I think that, to some extent, that's why you see some drivers are absolutely loved up and down the grid by every team, regardless of if they're kicking your ass or not. And other drivers are just disliked because like those kind of things, even if it's the heat of the moment, people can only handle the heat of the moment so many times before they're like, yeah, fuck this guy, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, I worry Max Verstappen is the man that called wolf in a sense because he keeps insulting these guys. But the way I look at it, it's like a quarterback in American football. It's like a point guard in the NBA or basketball, right? You have to have a understanding of who your personnel are, what are their areas of strength, and what are areas that they can improve upon. And apparently, if you ask Max what the area of improvement his team could have, I would just say it's breathing because he compared them to not very...
yes.
eligible life-breathing organism. So kudos to you, Max, because I keep hoping that your rudeness is your comeuppance, but it won't happen. But interesting to say.
I think back to your original question, though, Rohit, I think he did get a little bit of a glimpse of his future. And as long as Merck has the car, George Russell definitely has the minerals, as the British love to say, that to be fighting him. He's got the intelligence. He's got the racecraft. He's got the pace. I think it was funny because obviously the Merc doesn't have the pace of the Red Bull yet, but without that DRS, Russell was putting his car in beautiful defensive positions for lap after lap while that DRS drama was going on, and Max was threatening to murder everybody's family. It was amazing to see. Like, I don't want to like jump the gun for the theme of this podcast, but holy hell, did we just have the best race of the season, at least to me, so far, in Spain, the worst track on the calendar. Like, at least, we know no passing's going to happen in Monaco because it's Monaco, but like Spain is like a real wide open racetrack, and the one like passing opportunity that was at Spain was like the long straight going into turn 10, that like chicane, which they reprofiled to make it faster, like more medium speed, to take away the passing opportunity. And we got passing all over the place. Sorry, I know I'm jumping ahead. But yes, Max got a glimpse of his future fighting George Russell for the 2028 championship today.
So, related, last week we talked about, or last episode we talked about the challenges of the, I guess it was 2 episodes ago, the challenges of Formula One coverage. And this week there was a moment, I think it was when, I don't even remember who it was that passed. Somebody on the Sky Sports or the international broadcast for us basically said, we wish you could have shown you that pass as it happened. And I was thinking, that's exactly what like their theme that should be their slogan for the F1 on ESPN. Right. Yeah. We wish you could have showed you that.
Instead of it's only live once, we'll show you the replay later.
Yeah.
No, I think I know exactly what you're talking about because it was
one of the AlphaTauris, right?
No. It was Sainz just like trundling along in no man's land when he was like, I don't know, 10 seconds behind the car in front of him and 12 seconds ahead of the car behind him. And it was Russell passing Bottas, I think, for P3 at that point.
Yeah,
and they didn't show that, but because they were just showing Sainz in no man's land. That being said, since we're talking about this, we did have some faults. We're always going to. I'm giving a wide berth because I hate them so much, but I'm trying to be positive about this. It was a lot better compared to like Miami and
it was.
And like previous races, even just this year, if we're taking that as the sample size, it was way better. Like they didn't have as many like let's cut to the crowd shots or let's look at David Beckham in the McLaren garage on opiates. Like it was a lot better.
Now, is that because it's Spain and we've raced here for God knows how long consistently and they just don't do that kind of stuff? Because I feel like that's an interesting conversation, right? Like part of the reason why like I love some of these new tracks and you despise them is because it's such a spectacle. But as a broadcaster, as the person who's producing that, you're trying to appeal to those people that come in because of the spectacle, right? So you've got to show the fans, you got to show the whatever, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's where like they're trying to do too much outside of the actual racing.
It could be like, although you just called yourself the fans that are there for the spectacle, so you're like DJ Khaled.
I realized that after the fact.
I've often
we
said
the best.
We the best. Another one. I've often said that Nick Engvall is the white DJ Khaled, so I stand by that statement.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, like, I think people that haven't watched for a long time probably have never even think about these things, right? It's almost like when you see those. If you're an NBA fan, and you've watched the NBA, or if you watch, through NBA TV or other formats, where you can take that like above the backboard cam angle towards the other end, and it's like you only see that for like a split second in normal broadcast because they know that it's not really an appealing view. But like it's cool if you're like a diehard, right? Sometimes you want to see the way the play, kind of puts itself together, right?
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite example of those from an NBA perspective, there used to be a camera that was right on the hardwood floor. So it would just literally look like shoes and like the traction down to the bottom. So, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, Nick. But correct me if I'm wrong, Todd. Like you said, they had made a modification. So in a way, this is probably the best thing for us because we've taken an existing track that we've known about. We've made some modifications to showcase that, hey, we're not exactly tied to this track as it once was, because at the end of the day, as much as we want to be a business, we want to be an entertaining business. And I think Spain has been probably one of the more entertaining races, to your point. I hope that, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a sneaking suspicion. Maybe it's the cough medicine in me. I have a feeling Monaco is going to throw something good our way. And you can clip this, and then when it turns into that funeral/parade procession, we always know you can play this back. In fact, I will use this opportunity to say none of you wrote us a review. So the phrase for next week is, this is a procession. So thank you in advance.
I mean, we say processional every podcast. Actually, I think we should just clip. That's going to be like the slogan for the podcast. Monaco, something good is going to come this way.
Yeah.
But to play devil's advocate and kind of go to Rose point there, or going into like what Nick said also, if they were going to have a TV direction where they would show a bunch of cutaways to fans and like some weird Spanish dude hanging out in the grass, or people in the pit sitting there, like cut to the pit wall, whatever you want to call it.
Paul Gasol?
This is, yes, Paul Gasol. Yeah, sure.
Where was he? There's no greater Spanish ambassador for the last century than Pau Gasol. I digress. Sorry, that was my one.
No, but like, this is the race to do it, right? Because historically, the Spanish Grand Prix is boring as hell. Do it for these races, right? If you're trying to get people into the spectacle of the thing, do it for these kind of races. But like, we get really good TV direction at a track that took the one passing opportunity that we think of, at least on paper, and kind of took it away. And then we had passes in turns that shouldn't have passes. It was nuts. So like, I don't know what the answer is. It was a lot better this week, but it like, just focus on the action. Stop cutting to replays. They did it right after the start, after the crash when K-Mag and Hamilton crashed. Instead of focusing on the lead of the race, they're just like, nope, replay. Right away.
It's also like this format that you can literally see them kind of talk themselves into. It's like, okay, start of the race, we focus on the first 5 racers. And then inevitably, because there always seems to be a crash, that's when we'll shift focus. And then we'll show 5 different replays of the crash that inevitably happens. And then by the time that crash replay orgy is done, we go back to the front where there's a celibacy of positioning. So there you go.
Okay. So Todd, I think the challenge is, it's like hype, right? It's like the sneaker thing. It's like fitteds. It's all this stuff that like things get so hyped up that people are looking for that like hit of excitement, right? It's almost like, I don't know if you guys have seen Up, the cartoon animated movie, and the dog sad. Like is like squirrel, and like immediately distracted. So I feel like the producers are like, oh my god, somebody screaming his face off in the crowd at the Miami Grand Prix, and he doesn't have a shirt on. Plus, there's like
crypto.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is that like is like on their list of hot items for the week that they are supposed to like cut to in between. They just immediately knee-jerk reaction, and the producer is like, okay, we got to show this regardless of what's happening on the track. I feel like that's the squirrel moment for producers of Formula One right now. It's like the people, right? They have to show, and like they're trying to sell Miami as a thing for the future, right? Like, which, I've come to actually appreciate the race a little bit more, and as we moved away from it. But also, like, you're selling fake yachts in a wooden harbor. Like, it's a tough sell.
And unless Gunter Steiner is captaining one of those fake yachts, I don't want any part of it.
None of those for the Steiner ship. That little fake lagoon could not contain the Steiner ship. Since we're talking about Miami real quick, I saw a video. I found this guy on YouTube who's brilliant. He's like this very angry and disillusioned British kid. His name on YouTube is Rocket Powered Mohawk, and he just like trolls every race, and it's amazing. So I highly suggest checking him out. But he talked about the Miami GP. I watched one of his videos. You know how much a paddock pass was to the Miami GP?
$15K.
$32,000. The face value of those tickets, I think, is like $1,900, and somehow they sold out before they went on sale.
Todd, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter what the value is.
And my point being is backdooring happens in Formula One, so us sneakerheads can stop complaining.
Were they all wearing those frozen ones from a certain... Anyway.
Yeah. Marcus Jordan was on one of those fake
Allegedly. Please don't sue us. And if you do, my name is Mike Guillory. These are my co-hosts, Robbie Felici and Greg Atron. Sorry, Greg.
Oh, man.
I was going to say, here's my transition. Speaking of overwhelmingly sad moments during the 2-hour break that was Formula One, much like Charles Leclerc, my God, man. That was sad. And not even the saddest of trombones could have made me smile a little bit. That was just depressing. That was like reading Where the Red Fern Grows.
Yeah. Because everything looked like it was going right for him. Like, I mean, everything. Like, things you wouldn't expect. Like the DRS with Max. Just like, okay, well, I forget who pitted first. And like, yeah, I would have bet everything on him at like lap 15, and then it was like, you could just see he was crushed too.
Speaking of betting, shout out to Champagne Poppy, aka Drake, losing 300,000 Canadian on his bet on Charles Leclerc winning the race.
So I will do this. I was in Vegas this last week for a work conference. So because I have a gambling problem only in Vegas, and now because Formula One is the sport du jour, I went to Caesars and I just kind of wanted to see what are the betting lines, what could we bet on. And I thought it was really interesting because the only two things we could bet on was who is the overall driver champion and who is going to win the upcoming race. So I put a tenner on Carlos Sainz at, I think, plus 1,200 to win. And I had Charles Leclerc at plus 125 to win the Drivers' Championship. And I think I lost both. I mean, obviously I lost the Carlos Sainz bet, but I think I may have also lost the Charles Leclerc bet because I think the sadness that overcame him wasn't the fact that he lost Spain. I think that's the title. Like, there is no way that I see anybody stopping Max at this point unless Sergio develops a pair and then just says, I'm going to destroy you.
That would be amazing.
We'll have to talk about that in a second as well. Because, man, did that really get me right in the gonads. But, Charles Leclerc, he had essentially the perfect weekend. Even with Carlos Sainz, who I think was a step above his normal self this weekend. I think he had the home energy crowd thing going on. He was driving really well. He still couldn't put it past Leclerc on pole. And that, the end of qualifying was kind of a weird one. We saw Max end up in P4?
P4, I thought, because I think Sergio... Did he get second? I thought he got second.
Yeah, I think he ended up on second. He just didn't improve on his second lap. Never mind. Yep. But he couldn't... Even Carlos at his best, which I think he was near his best this weekend, couldn't put it past Leclerc. Leclerc was having a golden weekend. He was out in front by a pretty large margin when...
I think at one point he was up to 30 seconds, and they were just joking about when does he want to take his pit stop because he was so far ahead of everybody, it wouldn't have mattered. And I think to your point, that's easy street, and that's what makes everything all the more crueler, if you will, because it literally just looked like he saw it before everybody, and you can see the internalization of it, like, oh no, guys, no, what's happening? No, not again.
He was so calm about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
You expect him to be threatening to murder people's family at that point. Like,
right? Yeah.
You're that far in front of a race, and you're right, bro. He was like 30 seconds ahead, so he had a whole full pit stop in hand, and he would have pitted and came out in first. No worries there, right? And the weird thing was, again, going back to the broadcast, normally when things happen, Crofty loses his mind. He's like, "Oh no!" whatever. I can't do British.
He's in the gravel.
Something, yeah, right. He gets like super hyped, and he was just like, wait, is Charles Leclerc slowing down? And they were so calm about it. It was like, wait, what's happening? And then sure enough, just pop. It was just dunzo.
I mean, it kind of felt like, because he didn't like react in some crazy type of way, I thought maybe there was like some, virtual safety car or something that we weren't seeing. That was my assumption for the first like couple seconds when I saw him slowing down. And then like when, it was like, oh shit, this is not good. But
no, my immediate thought was, what did Latifi do now? Sorry, Drake. No, but I think
he had one of his best races of the year, to be honest.
He did. He got me all of 5 points. So thank you, Nicholas. You truly are the gift that keeps on giving. No, I will say this, to the point that I believe Nick made earlier. It's just the demeanor of the driver sometimes dictates how we editorialize and cover whatever misfortune or advantage they gain in the race. So if Max is the one that is the recipient of an inconsistent power unit and he sets a new record for most expletives thrown in a minute, yeah, I think the Crofties and Brundles of the world are going to paint a little bit more color. But because of the fact that Leclerc just truly seems to be a genuinely quiet, nice guy, I think that's where it goes back to the fact that he seems very likable. It could be completely wrong. And we've also all kind of been conditioned to think that all these drivers have a hint of arrogance to them that makes them unappealing. But no, I think much like every other human being on this planet, there's a subtle nuance associated with it. And like Shrek, they all have layers to them.
Well said.
So let's talk about this Red Bull. First, let's lead into this Red Bull conversation talking about both Red Bull cars spinning out, right?
Wait, did Sergio spin?
I didn't think Perez did. I thought it was just Max.
Oh no, you're right. It was Sainz and Max. Same corner, like what, 2 laps apart?
Yeah. No, it was like the NBA when there's a spot that the towel people forget to wipe down, and it was like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Man, that was like,
yes.
We've talked about this before on the pod, but I don't like races that are good, I'm using air quotes, because of crashes or DNFs or whatever. But like, it was amazing because it just added to what was already being a good race, right? It was like kind of a little lull in the action and then just snap. Wait, Sainz is off? Oh my God. Like, and then like 2 laps later, Max, same thing. Or I don't know who's first.
No, Max had 2 wobbles because he had the Sainz spill, and then he also had one where I think he took a little bit too much of the curb, but then because he's the champion race car driver of the world, he was able to catch it mid, I guess, stream, so then he righted the ship. But he kind of dodged a couple bullets today, Mr. Verstappen did.
Yeah, that just shows you how damn fast the Red Bull is, because he spun and still won the race. I know, like, yeah. it may have not happened with if Charles didn't blow up, but God, that's just it was amazing. Like, I don't even know how I almost don't have words for it because it was so unexpected. It was kind of like settling down into what we think of as a Spain race, and then all of a sudden, boom, 2 spins back to back.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, I think the 3 of them are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the field. Like, and Mercedes this race being the first time that they're really like unquestionably competitive, right? Because yeah, they had problems, but I think that the interesting thing with Red Bull is that you almost you almost already know how good they are and how far in front they can be. So for them to have like a mishap, like going off course, like, losing it a little bit, going into the gravel, like the DRS not working and still winning, it's like, where do you go from here, right? They're going to be dominant the rest of the year for the most part, unless there's mechanical failures. The car, it's like if you're not first or last kind of situation for them going ahead, right? Like they're either going to be DNFing from like some other thing, or they're going to be at the top. Like, I forget what the stat was, but it was like Max, Sergio, and Lewis share the most podiums, like 16 or something, 15 or 16 or something like that. And they were saying like if they were to finish all three of them at the top, or not, is it Max? No, sorry,
Bottas.
I think
yeah,
it's Bottas, Hamilton.
Terry Bottas.
yeah, would be like this would be a record if they all finished at the top again. But so with Red Bull, I just think there's just like I just don't see them losing any of the pace, right? They've already got the car to a point where everyone else has to play catch up for the rest of the season regardless. Ferrari is up there, but they've just been inconsistent as drivers, in my opinion, aside from this obviously, failure that happened today with Leclerc's car. But let's, I don't know. I don't want it to become, and I know Aaron's going to listen to this and he's going to be calling me out for it, but I don't want it to become boring the way that a lot of people thought it was boring when Lewis and Bottas were, always 1, 2, or 3, because that's what it feels like we're headed towards right now with Red Bull. Like there's almost no competition unless they have a failure. Like Max has literally won every race he's finished this year.
Yep.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm still looking at our exhaust notes pod draft Google sheet, and it is something to be seen that if you look at Max, and I think, Nick, you have Max in that draft, it's 0, 20, 0, 20, 20, 20. And 20 is the points that we give the first place driver, and 0 is always the last place driver, or if it's a DNF. And yeah, it truly is all or nothing for Max at this point. And I don't see him stopping unless he gets in his own way. And maybe this is kind of the noob question of the week. Is there some sort of equivalent to a technical foul where driver conduct can be used against them if they truly are very aggressive or use hostile language? Or is there no thing like that in Formula One?
No. I think the worst, if, let's say Verstappen actually threatened to murder somebody's family, I think the worst that would happen is a fine from the team, and if it wasn't the team, maybe the FIA. Okay. We did see this weekend these new race directors are doing an absolute no bullshit way of moderating these races. We saw, I think it was Yuki and Lando get their laps deleted.
Yep.
In qualifying at turn 12, which if you are unfamiliar is almost exactly as wide as the car, including the width of the white line, which is the, quote-unquote track limit. They were millimeters over, I guess. I never saw a good camera angle of it. But millimeters over the white line, which if they go any farther, they're in the gravel. And they both got their laps deleted in qualifying. And there's no way that would have happened under
the artist formerly known as Michael Massey.
Yes.
No, but I mean, I also thought, didn't Lewis get some sort of warning because he had exceeded track limits 3 times during the race as well? So I feel like it's the same genre of complaint that, to your point, Todd, we may have people with a backbone, so to speak, or at least have a general understanding of what the rules are from an FIA perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Can we do a little bit of tinfoil hat time?
Yes.
Because there's 2 things I want to talk about. One, we saw 2 Ferrari engines pop today. Guan Yu Zhou in the Sauber Alfa Romeo, is a Ferrari-powered car, and Charles's car. So are we getting now what Red Bull had at the beginning of the season, and are we going to see a dramatic bounce back? Because by Ferrari's own admission, they haven't really spent much on development. I think they brought a couple to this race, but they're the pre-race week build-up was Bonatto talking to the press that they were bringing some report to the FIA showing how much everyone else has spent, which is really interesting. How do you have that information?
Ferrari is the tweet code.
They're the league's hall pass monitor. It's okay.
They really are. They literally got caught cheating the fuel pump thing in 19? And the FIA was just like, you know what? You're good. Just suck for a couple seasons. and we'll brush it under the rug, which they did. Good for them. But so maybe we're seeing that. So that's kind of a conspiracy thing, like a couple of blow-ups, keep it interesting, and then the next thing. Sorry, this is back to the Red Bull. I don't know why I think this, but we haven't gotten to the like Checo Max flip flop yet, so I have to talk about this because that was like a gut punch to me. Checo had a great race, his pace was there, and I swear to God that Christian Horner was in his race engineer's ear saying, "Hey bud, you got to tell him to manage his tires, so we can get Max to catch back up. You got to tell him to manage, tell him to manage, tell him to manage," because he was like 7 seconds ahead of Max at one point. And he had 4 lap older tires than Max. They were both on the mediums at that point, I think. And in 4 laps, Max was on his bumper, and they were saying like, "Hey, if Max catches back up, then you got to let him pass." And that's when Checo was like, "This is so not right," or whatever. And he was pissed after the race. He's like, "Happy for the team, but we got to talk about this." Yeah. And rightfully so. If that is a complete conspiracy, what the hell, Checo? Where was your pace? Like, Max deserved that win if he truly, in that time frame. Yeah, on basically the same age tires, he caught up 7 seconds in 4 laps. He absolutely earned it. But I have a feeling there was some foul play there.
No, there was, to borrow the racing term, a chicanery on the track as well as on the track, if you will. And I will say this about Checo. What do we know about Checo more than anything? He was the man that Martin Brundle said had the most delicate right foot we've ever seen. If you tell Checo Perez to manage his tires, that's like telling Steph Curry, "Hey, shoot more threes." Like, that is the one thing he does better than anybody on this earth. And I will say that to my grave. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And the conspiracy theorist in me is wondering, like, is this kind of the initial, hey, we're going to try to make Checo mad because we kind of want to see Gasly in that spot again? Because that's the only way I could justify it. But then again, why would Gasly want to go back to Red Bull? So it's one of those things where, depending on how strong the tinfoil on your head is, we can go a number of different ways.
Yeah, and Gasly really hasn't been performing up to deserving that second seat at Red Bull. But so if you're new to Formula One, team orders are somewhat not allowed, but always happening. Sometimes they're obvious. Sometimes they're, like today, kind of questionable when like a driver is, on pace to win, like Checo was today. It makes sense numerically for Max to win because he has the best shot right now at winning the championship. So there is logic behind the team saying, "Hey, we need Max to win." But that goes back to our conversation, as a team principal, as a team owner, as a driver, what's the priority? A driver championship or a team championship? Because, if it's team championship, Sergio Perez deserves to win today if it's just about the team, right? But with Max being kind of the prodigal son in most of the narrative for F1 right now, it's understandable that they had him switch. And to Todd's point, I think 100%, like, there was no question that Red Bull wanted Max to win the race. It's disappointing because, one, this was absolutely Checo's best shot to win, and this is absolutely I think going to happen at some point. He's a great driver. It's just like Bottas with Mercedes for the last 5 years or whatever, right? Even though you don't want him to win necessarily because you want Lewis to be your guy and your team leader and your number one driver, like, you give two guys that have very similar skill sets and abilities an incredible car, you can't expect them to not want to compete with each other.
Yeah. I mean, it was just really disheartening to see this early. Like, if we're just past the summer break and Max is out in front by 100 points, cool, do it, whatever. But, like, mathematically, everybody's technically still in the championship. So, and Max isn't going to suffer that much by getting a P2. I mean, if I'm Checo in that stage, like, he's going to have to overtake me. If they're telling me to manage and they tell me, oh, if Max catches up again, if this is a real thing, I don't know, just my brain going off. If they're telling me to manage and then they say if Max catches up again, you got to let him pass, it's it. I'm game over, balls to the walls till the end of the race. But you got to catch me.
Absolutely. But I think also to your point, Nick, we could see Red Bull win the title because of how dominant Max is. And I think last year it seemed to be a bit of an aberration where we saw the constructors and the drivers being split, where one team won one award while the other team won the other. And usually that doesn't happen, correct?
Well, we haven't in recent memory, right? It's been Mercedes with the drivers.
Mercedes, and then last year was Mercedes Red Bull.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that seems to be more the niche than the norm.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think it's important to like, Checo is third in the driver standings, right? He's only like, he's what, maybe 15 points behind, maybe 20 points behind. Like,
he's currently 25.
Yeah, like a solid race or two, and a DNF, and he is right there, at the top with Max. So it's really, to Todd's point, I think just absolutely way too early for that shit to be happening. Even I think Aaron said in the Discord, it's so disappointing to see that as a fan. You just want to see the guys race. You like team orders. It's like, just let them race, man. Like when it comes down to it, you just want to let them race. But if it gets to the point where they're pushing each other and Max is, unable to pass or something like that, and you absolutely want him to win, then, go for it. But like, it also happened kind of early on, right? For what I thought, I think it happened like, 20 laps to go or something. And to me, yeah, there's a lot of things that could happen in that time, to Todd's point earlier, you would expect a safety car almost, but it was just really disheartening. And I think that, look, this is also why these drivers, as great as the teams can be, as great as the drivers can be, this is why, like, a driver, it's never certain that your favorite driver is going to be with your favorite team or stick with the team he's on, because at the end of the day, if Checo thinks he's capable of putting another car on the podium outside of the Red Bull car, there's no reason for him to stay with Red Bull, beyond his whatever his contract is right now, right? This is Bottas going to Alfa Romeo, and honestly, like, I think he had a finished sixth today, but he's done a hell of a job in that car. That car is definitely not on par with the rest of the cars at the top, but I feel like Bottas has been like in the top 5 or 7 throughout most of this season. So
yeah,
Checo Perez. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Oh no, I was going to change gears to Alfa Romeo, but you finished on.
No, I'll give you the segue that you need. I think last time I was on, I said Pierre Gasly should go to Alfa Romeo because I'm really tempted to see what that car does with 2 competent drivers. All due respect to my favorite driver on the grid, whose name I always butcher, so I won't even say it. But yeah, I now recant that statement because I think a driver lineup of Bottas and Perez would be very interesting. But that's, again, me fantasy booking. But talk to me about Alfa Romeo, Todd.
So I had really high hopes coming into this weekend. They were one of the teams that brought 10 listed upgrades, which I think there was 2 teams that brought 10, one team that brought 8. But yeah, we can rapid fire these real quick. They had, a really strong showing this weekend. Valtteri, good old Terry, as Nick mentioned, was like kind of out driving the car in some way. And Guan Yu Zhou looked decent. He still doesn't have his head around that, I think, driving in Formula One in general, but that car especially. But you bring all these upgrades. Obviously, they worked because they still had the pace to keep up with everyone else. And you absolutely botch the strategy. They went, let's see, Valtteri Bottas did a 2-stop race when everyone else did 3. And that's why he dropped that place right at the end. It could have been a P4 or even a P3 with the way he was driving today. Man, did they just shit the bed there. And then the other one I wanted to touch on real quick, another team that brought 10 updates this weekend was Aston Martin. What the hell is going on? That's just a sinking ship on fire. They both were all over the place. And I think they, again, bottled the strategy. They did a 2-stop with Vettel. But they just can't. Anytime they do something right, because the upgrades helped, apparently. And then they just, like, they were like, the car's not working. I guess we'll just copy-paste the Red Bull car. Which we haven't touched on yet. But apparently they proved it somehow that they had been working on that car design since November or something. Which, I don't know, maybe Daddy Stroll cut a check to the FIA and it's like, oh yeah, we built this car a long time ago. But they just can't, even if they have a 4-time world champion in the car who still obviously has the talent, and they can't do anything right.
Now, what I will say about both those teams, because I find them interesting. So, in spite of all of the dumbassness of Alfa Romeo, they're still a top 5 team. And then, not only that, between the capitulation that Bottas had last race, where he let both Mercedes drivers pass him, because I think that's more muscle memory and out of habit than anything else, he could easily be a top 5 driver. The other thing I will say, because I loved your conspiracy theorist segment, and now I want one for myself, I guarantee you, and this is my other fantasy booking of the week, they're going to make Seb Vettel the fall guy in all this, and I think that's where Danny Rick might end up if this McLaren thing also doesn't shake the way that we think it will.
That would be interesting. That would be very interesting. I mean, so Aston Martin absolutely tanked in qualifying, but they actually, Vettel finished 11th, which, considering all of the just crap that went on and all of the energy around the upgrades and all of the press and people calling them out, all that, I'm honestly surprised that he made it that far up the grid from whatever, like 15th or 16th, where, I think both of them were towards the bottom, but yeah.
I would be okay with Danny Rick, who's in no man's land right now. Get your shit together, Danny Rick. You got outdriven by your teammate by a large margin, and it was made known after the race he raced while he had tonsillitis. He felt absolutely horrible. I don't know if you guys saw on the driver parade or on the track, Lando literally just sat down and covered himself with an umbrella. Like, he was feeling very bad. And he still outraced Honey Badger by just leaps and bounds. Anyway, I would be okay with Danny Rick ending up on Aston if Aston gets sold to Andretti and they become Andretti Autosport. So he's kind of like an American anyway. Cool. And then we have Colton Herter and Danny Rick in a green car. Boom.
I'm all for it. And I was going to ask you what was larger, the size of Lando Norris's tonsils or the gap between Lando and Danny Rick. So thank you for kind of beating me to the punch.
That's not funny. Oh, my God. Danny, get your shit together.
I mean, there's something to be said about the confidence for these drivers, right? If you're new to the sport especially, you don't really understand, like, these guys have to feel like they are the best driver in the world to be competitive with the best drivers in the world. And we see that on a regular basis, or this season, unfortunately for McLaren fans, we've seen that with Danny Rick. We've seen, I mean, even today with Carlos Sainz, right? Like, spinning is often one of those things, like making mistakes as a driver happens because you are not at 100% confidence-wise. In order to be performing the way Max does, Max has to get up in the morning and, think that I piss excellence. I'm going to beat everyone on the grid, no matter what happens. And if anything happens, I'm coming for your children. kind of attitude. Like that is what success in Formula One has become in a lot of ways. And I think that's like the interesting part, because not only do you have to have the team behind you, right? Like if you wake up and think you're the best driver in the world, it doesn't mean shit if you're, stuck in a terrible car, right? Like you could be the best driver in the world, and if you're driving, I don't want to call out any names from this season, but like you have to have the best car on the grid to be competitive regardless, right? Like it's so, the difference is so small between all of these teams that any little slip in your self-confidence sends you tumbling down the grid, and all the other things that come along with it. But then that spirals out of control, which is also why you see drivers leave the sport in a much shorter time than a lot of other, I think, professional sports.
What have you done for me lately? Like it's a lot of that.
Yep.
I mean, it's more so the teams towards the driver, but it is the driver to themselves. You're totally right, Nick. Like I think unfortunately Max is too stupid to not believe. Like if he was in the Williams, he would still have that I'm gonna beat everyone, even though like Albon and Latifi know like, oh, we're gonna be trundling around the back. But yeah, I think the confidence is everything. I feel like Carlos just got his groove back. Stella Carlos, this week, and still didn't perform. So like, you have to have the right car at the right moment with the right team behind you and the right mindset.
Yes.
But again, he spun, right? So to finish fourth with a spin that was much worse than Max's off, right? I mean, it's impressive, but that's the difference between Max and Carlos. The confidence, right? Like you had almost the same experience, even like on track, and the mistake. The car, like the Ferrari pits have been incredibly quick. Red Bull has been perfect throughout the season for the most part. It's just one of those things. It's really, really interesting, but yeah.
No, I was just going to say this, Todd. I think you had mentioned that you thought Carlos had a good drive. I thought the opposite. Like, I thought he stalled right at the beginning of the race, and that's why he plummeted. This seems to be like the second race where he didn't have the best of starts. And to your point as well, Nick, he spun on the gravel. But now I'm trying to understand, because this is the age-old question in Formula One, much like we have what comes first, the chicken or the egg. In this case, are we wondering what led Carlos to probably the most underwhelming fourth place finish we've seen all year? Was it the fact that he's that great of a driver, or is it the fact that that Ferrari car is truly 1B when it comes to being the second best car on the grid?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Time will tell. He needs to have a good weekend. Watch, he'll win in Monaco just because it's supposed to be Charles's race, and that's
one of those starts of the summer when Charles Leclerc bottles it at Monaco, because he's always at like P1 in qualifying, and then he's like, oh, squirrel, and then he runs into a wall.
Yeah.
Sorry, Niki Lauda. Rest in peace.
Seriously. I mean, to be fair, before we get into, we got to wrap, I know, but before we get into that, I'm one of those Formula One fans who always wants the home driver to win. Like, I have my favorite drivers, my favorite teams, but like when it comes down to it, like I think last year Checo potentially, what he have holding off Lewis in Mexico, right, was like one of the most amazing things to see. His dad, the crowd, everybody behind it. Like I still always want to see that. So I'll be pulling for Charles next race.
I'd like a little redemption, not slap the wall in qualifying. I just want a wet race because I want chaos. I just want to watch the world burn. I want to see Latifi on pole in the wet.
Amazing.
Oh, man. If that's the case, I'm going to start calling that dude Canada Dry then.
Okay. On that note, let's get into a little fantasy update. Leave us a review, people.
Please.
Leave the silly saying. We want to hear it.
because otherwise we have to improvise. And as you can see, Canada Dry was very bottom of the barrel, and it's only going to get worse. So for
I
the
thought
love
it was
of-
good.
Thank you.
thought
I
it was
appreciate
good.
that. I do.
All right.
But write us a review.
We'll start with the unmentionable league. Let's see here. League standings in the Exhaust Notes Podcast League. I am now in first place. Oh, wait, no, sorry. That's last race points. I had the best week, apparently. Followed up by Jackal with 2 points behind me. And then Aaron with 812. So it was 956, 954, and 812. Oh, yes, I am in first place in that league. That is awesome. Look at that. All right,
Nicely
moving
done.
on to the more... Nick, you're in 6th, and Ro, you're in 7th. Yeah. All right. The official F1 Fantasy League, we have, for the Spanish GP, we have Alpha Ash Ari, Nick's brother, topping the week with 200 points, followed up by Mr. Fantasy himself, Travis Pete, that was weird. Trav Pete.
Yep. Just keep it going. I like it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to call him. That's what his mom calls him.
And then in third, Aaron with All Has No Breaks with 151. And season totals, we still have up top Big Dog Nicholas C with For Tapping That Ass on 1,260 points. In second place, Alpha Ash Ari with 1,254 points. So it's real tight up top. And in third place, All Haas No Breaks with 1,227. I'm currently in 5th. Ro, you are in 6th. And Nick, you are still in 10th.
Hey.
But you're not last.
I'm not last. I'm technically in the points.
You are in the points. You are in the points. It's great. Silver linings. Okay, and the most important one. Weekly totals. I will go lowest to highest here. In last place this week, Aaron with the lowest season total, or the lowest weekly total so far this season, with 35. There was only 2 DNFs and he had both of them.
Wow.
Next up in P3, we had Nick with 47 points, followed by myself in P2 with 48 points. And we had the lowest weekly total this week, and we also had the highest weekly total so far this season. Rohit had 63 points.
6 away.
Nicely done. And we have a new leader in the clubhouse. So season totals. We have Nick in last place at 244. Followed by Aaron at 287. Then myself at 298. And jumping from P3 to P1, that last lap overtake, Rohit is at 308.
It's all downhill from here.
Impressive.
No, I would just like to thank Seb for showing up this week. I think those 10 improvements truly allowed me to get all of the 9 points you gave me. And young Canada Dry, once again, giving me 4 crucial points. So I think that, you know what, we always kind of talk about what nicknames do you give your drivers that have caught on. So Terry Botas and Canada Dry. So if you are planning to write us a review, if you don't give us a silly phrase, give us a goofy nickname for one of the drivers on the grid, because I think we all need that moment of levity.
Yes, please. Oh, man. Well, I mean, quite a bit going on this week. I don't want to say this is the best race of the year so far, but this is the best race of the year so far.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
I was having that debate with a friend earlier today. And my initial reaction was the first race of the season was better because we had that towards the end of the race battle with Max and Charles when they kept overtaking each other. And we want to see that, right? We want to see overtakes for the lead of the race. That would be like the dream. But we had absolutely chaos everywhere. Carnage, Rohit's favorite word again. I'll try to work it in every episode.
I appreciate that.
We had Fernando Alonso pass somebody on turn 12, which I know nobody is a nerd like me and plays the Formula One video games, but that's like damn near impossible. It was amazing.
Yeah, like around the outside.
Yes. It's crazy.
I will say this, and you guys let me know if I'm being too hyperbolic, but I feel like this is head to toe the strongest driver grid I've seen in about 5 years, where I would not be surprised if, let's say, 15 of these drivers somehow ended up on a podium because they're that talented as a group.
Bold take there.
Listen, I'm the king of the bold takes, much like
you
Daniel
are.
Yes,
you are.
I mean, I would probably agree with that. It's really close. This is definitely a good group that's out there right now, but
no, that awkward silence tells me we need to just stop and just let us bask in that greatness that I just brought to the group. So
that's why we have you here.
Yep.
All right.
Well, any other last parting bold takes before we wrap up?
I will say this. Hopefully we can do a Friday episode because I am working at an employer that gives us summer Fridays off. So if that is the case and we're able to, I would love to do a podium prediction show for Monaco because it might be the least dynamic in terms of overtakes we're going to see. But then again, I was also famously saying earlier this episode that Monaco's got a good one in it, but we'll see. I'm hoping that qualifying doesn't decide that race.
Wishful thinking. I lock it in for the Friday pod. I'm down. You just reminded me that we didn't do podium predictions, so we'll save that for the Friday pod.
All right, let's do it. Well, let's let everybody know where they can find you guys outside of the podcast.
On Instagram, I am T-Yeezy. On Twitter, I am T-Yeezy-F1. Come follow me. I make dumb jokes quite often.
Please follow me on Instagram at RoadM13. Follow me on Twitter at Roheezy. That's the rhyming portion that we all have come to love as this show ends. But Nick, how about yourself?
You can follow me at Nick Engvall on all the platforms. More importantly, follow Exhaust Notes FM on all the platforms. Thanks for tuning in, listening. We appreciate all of you. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Write us a review, you clowns.
Go Tiffy, P1, Monaco. You heard it here first.